Yes, a core part of British foreign policy should be to promote democracy all around the world, including in the Gulf. And what does that mean in practice? Well, the whole of our bilateral relationship, our bilateral trading, economic and diplomatic relationship with other countries should be premised on shared values of democracy, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. And part of this means taking a very firm position and taking strong action, if necessary, when our allies seriously undermine these values by, for example, seriously limiting press freedom or freedom of expression, by repressing minority groups, or by persecuting human rights activists or pro-democracy campaigners. And we've seen this happen all across the Gulf, particularly since the Arab Spring in 2011. But the problem here is that the British government hasn't been doing that at all. Take Saudi Arabia, for example. Britain hasn't taken any meaningful steps to encourage Saudi Arabia to maybe not transition to democracy, because that's too big an ask too soon, but to take steps to encouraging a free and fair society and a vibrant civil society, and even just a basic respect for human rights. And in fact, the British government has consistently failed to properly call Saudi Arabia out on its egregious, awful human rights abuses. Last year, the Canadian Foreign Ministry sent out a tweet criticising Saudi Arabia for the imprisonment of female human rights activists. And Saudi Arabia responded like a petulant child. It cut off all diplomatic and economic ties with Canada. It expelled the Canadian ambassador and recalled all of the Saudi students who were out in Canada studying. And what did the British government do? Silence. Not only should our government have been standing up and supporting Canada in this dispute, backing our real ally here, but actually it should have been doing exactly what Canada had the guts to do, which was to call out Saudi Arabia on these human rights abuses. And sadly, this is part of a much wider pattern. We shouldn't have rolled out the red carpet for Mohammed bin Salman when he came to visit the UK last year, allowing him to have lunch with the Queen and things like that. Theresa May shouldn't have gone on her charm offensive to Saudi Arabia in 2017, where she went with the chief executive of the London Stock Exchange and almost begged Saudi Arabia to list its national oil company, Saudi Aramco, in London on the London Stock Exchange rather than in New York, and even offered to change the LSE's corporate governance rules, its listing rules, to entice Saudi Arabia to do that. And last October, following the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi, we should have taken a very firm action following this. For example, immediately suspending arms sales to Saudi Arabia, demanding that Saudi Arabia be expelled from the UN Human Rights Council, and imposing sanctions on anyone who's found to have been involved in the murder, including asset freezes and visa bans. But instead, this should have been a red line, which Saudi Arabia could never have crossed. But instead, it's business as usual. And the fact that we found out this week that Saudi Arabia will next year be hosting the G20 summit is, frankly, an insult to the memory of Jamal Khashoggi and everything that he stood for. And Britain should have vehemently opposed that. And the reason why it's important for Britain to take action in these circumstances is because a basic respect for human rights is the first step towards creating a free and fair society, which is the route to democracy. And this would be a popular policy among the British public too. A very recent Ipsos Mori poll found that 50% of the British public think that we should only trade with countries that have good human rights records. And that it also found that only 4% of the people surveyed thought that Saudi Arabia was a force for good in the world. The other 96% thought the opposite. And the reality is that most people aren't happy with the government having a close and cosy relationship with a country that imprisons, tortures, and executes its own citizens for simply speaking out and criticising the government. And so the bottom line is this: being able to trade with the UK, receiving large amounts of arms and military support from the UK, receiving diplomatic cover from the UK on the global stage, all of that should come at a price. And that price has to be a basic respect for human rights.